And it is quite remarkable what they're doing. If you think AI has had an impact, stand by, because the compute power that quantum brings, it's on steroids.
Who is Sir Martin Sorrell?
My dad said, find an industry you enjoy, find a company in it that you enjoy, build a reputation. And then if at the age of 40, halfway through or thereabouts, you want to go off and do something on your own, go and try it, which is actually effectively what I did.
Total mindset shift of being in a company to then become the entrepreneur.
So we went into the areas that were unfashionable, low P areas, small areas, but with growth, which you could bring together. And by the end of 18 months, the stock price had gone from about 29p to about 150.
You're an opportunity creator. You make things happen.
I really couldn't conceive of getting up in the morning having nothing to do. My exam, when I got an A-, but it was three circles. One circle was family, one was society, and one was career. I would define success as being successful in all those three areas, which I wasn't, but I think that's the objective.
Sorry to interrupt. I've never asked this before, but if you can subscribe and follow, that will allow me to keep bringing extraordinary guests onto the show. Now let's get back to it. Looking forward to this conversation.
So am I.
Tell me, who is Sir Martin Sorrell?
I guess, I would say I was an ad man, but then everyone in the ad industry say, no, he's not an ad man at all. I mean, David Ogilvy said never wrote an ad in his life. Jeremy Bullmore, who I think was as talented as David Ogilvy, got a lot of recognition, but probably not as much recognition as David, said, I like to count. When people used to say I was a bean counter, which is wrong, I'm not an accountant by technically, an MBA. Jeremy said, Martin does like to count beans, and the more beans he counts, the better it is. So I guess ad man, bean counter, probably.
What about deal maker?
Yeah, my dad said, find an industry you enjoy, find a company in it that you enjoy, build a career. In his lifetime, he was, you started at 20, he started at 13, but theoretically, you started at 20 and you retired at 60. And I'm 80 and I'm still working, or 81 and still working. But his theory was, you find an industry you enjoy, find a company in it you enjoy. If after 20 years, so at the midpoint, build a reputation, not a reputation that you get invited by you to do a podcast or whatever, but you build a reputation where people sort of respect what you've done. And then if at the age of 40, halfway through or thereabouts, you want to go off and do something on your own, try it. Go and try it, which is actually effectively what I did. I don't know whether there was a little bell that went off when I was 40, but I started in the advertising industry with Saatchi's, CFO. Well, I was a consultant for them with James Gulliver, who was nobody will remember James now maybe, but he was a very successful food retailer, entrepreneur, who built Oriel Foods and sold it to RCA Corporation. He ran Fine Fare for Garfield Weston, the food chain, and then built Oriel Foods, which was like a food conglomerate. And then I became his they called me a personal financial advisor. Actually, it was his gopher. I was his bag carrier. And we made investments in various things. Sweet manufacturer up in Manchester called Taverner Rutledge, a double glazing company called Alpine Holdings, and Sayers Confectioners, a bakery and a retail bakery up in the north, and Saatchi's. Actually, it was called Garland Compton, gone public. Had gone sort of ex-growth. The chairman, Kenneth Gill, was worried about growth. So he said to James, why don't you come in, take a stake and help me build it? And then Ken did a very bright thing, which he merged with the Saatchi brothers. It was a reverse takeover. Morris and Charles took over. They swapped their stock for stock in the company. Had about, I think it was 20-25% of the company, a little bit over 20 of the company, effectively controlled it. And James and I were consulting for them like we did the other companies, and Morris needed a finance director, and the headhunter said, have you spoken to Martin about it? And he said, no. He said, well, I'll go and speak to Martin about it. And that was it. So I got into the industry by accident. And really, we built Saatchi's into the largest in the world. It was, when I think back on it, it was quite remarkable, because when I joined in 1977, 78, we had offices in Bristol and Birmingham and Leeds and Manchester and Edinburgh. Didn't have anything outside the UK, and we won't go into all the intricacies, but we did an absolutely brilliant deal with Compton Advertising Company, which was a Proctor agency based in New York, a private partnership, basically. One of those classic. There were a whole series of agency businesses in the days of Mad Men and Don Draper when they were private partnerships, and we basically very cunningly absorbed them, and then became the largest in the world. And then at the age of 40, I decided to have a go on my own, and that was WPP.
I want to capture that, because there's a total mindset shift of being in a company with the security that goes with a kind of a role, if you like, and the benefits of salary and so on, to then become the entrepreneur. And it feels like that conditioning from your father, that advice to be your own boss one day, was in there. Did that come naturally to you as well?
I had a very close relationship with my father, super close. I mean, this is before the days of mobile phone. This was the days when you used to go up the motorway and you used to get out at a gas station, and you used to go into a call box, a red call box, and you just press button A and put in coins. So this was in primeval times. But I used to talk to my father, I would say 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day. He was a retailer. He ran a very big 750 stores. In its day, it was the biggest retailer of electrical goods, TVs, radios, record players, refrigerators, etc., in the country. It was a subsidiary of an industrial holding company called Firth Cleveland. So he knew nothing about the ad business, except they did a little bit of advertising. He knew about people, being a retailer. He left school when he was 13. So, I mean, and I tried to work with my dad. It's very interestingly, I had this super close relationship, but when we actually started to try and do something together, it was a complete, absolute disaster.
Why was that?
Well, he had a view and I had a view, and the twain would not meet. No, it was really, really sad. If there's one thing I regret to my dying day, it will be that we never managed to get it off the ground. But he interesting guy, to your point, treated the business as though it was his own, despite the fact that he didn't own it. It was a subsidiary of an industrial holding company. Eventually he left, and he played around with some things on his own, and I helped him with that, but not to the degree that I would have liked to have done. So that's a regret. But going back to your point, I don't really look at it that way. I mean, I made a little bit of money with Saatchi's. I had probably in Saatchi's stock about, I think, $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, and this was in 1985, 84, and I borrowed against that from Coutts. Very interestingly, a story that has never come out. The bank manager at Coutts bought some stock, and he got fired by the bank because he bought stock, and they thought he traded on inside information. It was super unfair, I thought, because he didn't. And also, Morris Saatchi also bought stock in Warren Plastic Products.
Just backing you, ultimately.
Backing me, which was very funny as well, which was also a controversial thing. It had to be revealed in the takeover document. Well, it wasn't a takeover document, because we took a 29.9% stake. Preston Rubble was a stockbroker and myself. We took a 29.9% stake because we couldn't afford any more. We'd love to have taken more. So I had about 14 or 15%. Preston had about similar amount. And so we started off. So when you say, I put some money in, we went into Warren Plastic Products. We had some criteria for a shell company. It had to be a manufacturing company because it would be cheap. It couldn't have any debt. It had to have freehold property. had to be profitable, and we wanted management that was mature but not senile, so they could look after the manufacturing business. And it was a wire basket manufacturer, actually an animal cage manufacturer as well, which we were a little bit sensitive about at the time. And we used it as a shell company. And those were the days, that today they call them SPACs, cash shells. But in those days, you remember Jim Slater, Lord Hanson, Jimmy Goldsmith and others, you get a quote, Greg Hutchins, you get a quoted vehicle, you'd take a stake, people would anticipate what you were going to do, the price of the stock would rise, and you would get a currency, a paper currency with a high PE underlying it. And that gave you the ammunition to do other things. And in the first 18 months of Wire and Plastic Products PLC, as WPP as it is today, I mean, it's a bit ironic that, what is still one of the biggest advertising agencies, not the biggest anymore, but one of the biggest, is called Wire and Plastic Products.
I was thinking that before we sat down, yeah.
It's a little bit bizarre. And in fact, it's a wire basket manufacturer. But, we built what we called a below-the-line company. So we went into the areas that were unfashionable. Low P areas, small areas, but, with growth, which you could bring together. And by the end of 18 months, the stock price had gone from about 29p to about 150 in 18 months on the promise of what was to come. And that gave us the quoted ammunition, or the quoted vehicle, to make the bid for JWT in 1987, which was hostile, but as Jimmy Goldsmith said famously, it's not hostile to the shareholders, it's not hostile to the management, it's only really hostile to the CEO of the business. And people didn't understand, and still don't understand, how institutional agencies are or were, and how institutionally strong they are. I mean, they do divide, people do go in and out of the office every day and up and down in the elevator, but it is the principal asset of the company. But the brand value in the traditional agencies or the storied agencies and their relationships is quite strong. There is a certain inertia amongst client and client relationships who makes it stronger than it appears. But it was pretty revolutionary at the time. The thought that you would do a hostile takeover, which we did in 87, but it was 13 times our size, and we had the ammunition because we built the shell up.
Of course.
So a bit different today with SPACs, because they put cash in, and I don't quite agree with the SPAC structure. I think it's a little bit of a...
No, I've been looking at that.
A little bit of a rip-off in some ways, in terms of where the fees go and where the interests go. But we took it. So was it a risk, coming back to the question? Not really. We had confidence in our own ability. The timing was right. At that time we were moving into the Thatcher-Reagan era, the era of globalization. Ted Levitt, who's now forgotten. If I ask a group of people whether they've ever heard of Ted Levitt now, I mean, years ago that everybody would put their hands up. Now nobody knows who he was. He was a Harvard Business School professor. And he wrote a seminal article in 1983, which was actually the manifesto for Sargis. I mean, when I read it in the Harvard Business Review, I did go around. I was in Charlotte Street. My office was on the other side of Charlotte Street, on the 5th floor, I think it was. And I went round to Morrison Charles' office and I sort of said, "Eureka, this is it." And it was. What it said was, consumers are going to consume everything in the same way everywhere. And it was the era of globalization. It was the era of British Airways and that wonderful, which are still, the Manhattan Landing ads that Sargis did, that Charlie, Jeremy Sinclair, whoever, did in those years were super, super good. And that was the era.
You've seen so much change in innovation, and obviously that Thatcher period stimulated a lot of entrepreneurial activity. So amazing timing, but it was obviously in you to do that. But just fast forwarding now, you've got all the FIFA tags still on your wrist. You're 81, you're still working. That's why I brought that deal maker bit up. And I want to just kind of almost like fast forward to present and then slightly ratchet back.
Just on the deal maker point, people, that's a sort of throwaway line where people say, "Oh, well, he was just interested in deals." Interested in building business. I mean, one of the things that people don't understand, I wrestled with WPP for 33 years. we had the initial surge from 85, let's say, to 90. I over-leveraged the Ogilvy deal in 89. I mean, the great thing about 87 and Thomson was we found the property in Japan, and the total cost of Thomson was $525 million, half in cash, half in shares, with a 1-for-1 rights issue. And then immediately we got a net 100 million from the sale of the Japanese property. We thought the property was Berkeley Square. Long story, it turns out to be Tokyo. Those are the days, you're a property man or ex-property man. Those were the days when you used to depreciate property on your balance sheet, freehold property. The rules were you depreciate it over 40 years. So every year, the value of your freehold property fell by 2.5%. Totally illogical. And the asset strippers, as they were called, the Slater Walkers, the Hansons, the Goldsmiths, that was one of the principal trades. And when we looked at JWT, we saw this freehold property. I thought it was Berkeley Square, where Schwarzman has Blackstone's offices now. What is it? 80 Berkeley Square, where that was where JWT had a lease. When we got in, we found that it was this property in Japan they had, which in 1989, the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was worth more than many countries in the world. I mean, it peaked at that value, and we sold it out for just over 200 million. And we had to pay capital gains tax in Japan of about 50%. So we netted 100. So 100 came off the cost. Morgan Stanley were the defending bank on the hostile, and they advised the board that it was worth $30 million. It was actually worth 207, 205.
That's a huge
so we had luck. And then in 89, we did a similar structure, but I did a convertible preferred with debt. And that was a mistake. I overgeared the company, and I forgot that a convertible is only convertible if stock prices rise. And of course, we had a recession in 89, 1991, and we had to do a refinancing. We never missed a debt repayment or interest repayment, but we had to do a debt financing. And then during 90, we grew the business organically. People forget that. And we didn't really do anything of substantial scale until the year 2000, when we merged, in inverted commas, with Young and Rubicam. We were 2/3 of the merged total, so we had control. And then we bought Gray in 2004, which was a really good deal. Y&R was okay. Ogilvy was a good deal. JWT was an excellent deal. I would say Y&R was a bit more mixed. Gray was strong. Taylor Nelson was interesting. But people, they say deal maker and not integrator or not runner. That's not fair, because it's 33 years. Okay, so I'd like to see everybody else do 33 years.
I'm really glad you articulated that, because to me, I chose those words, deal maker. I have not heard anyone that was my way of saying you're an opportunity creator. You make things happen, and I want to touch on the fact that you're choosing to be here now in August, and so many people are on holiday.
We've got nothing
you
else
don't
to do.
need to, but we know you do, and that's so that's the bit.
I think
that's the bit.
Well, we discussed it a little bit in the preamble. All those people that retired to Florida and play golf, I don't feel sorry for, but their biggest moan is they don't have anything to do. Well, that's their choice. And actually, going back to what my dad said, retire at 60, because life is being elongated for various reasons, and medicine, the advances we're going to see with AI and quantum are going to prolong life even more. It means, you have to think very carefully about, what you do and how you do it and where you do it. And that's going to become more of an issue. But I think people lose brain power and physical power when they retire. So keeping active,
working
mentally,
muscle.
Yes, is critically important. And I really couldn't conceive of getting up in the morning and having nothing to do.
No, I can feel that. You thrive on that. And you've got all the tags from FIFA.
Well, yes,
that's tell me what you're working on now.
I'm pretty lazy. Well, we're doing the film for FIFA with Disney, a cinematic film. We're doing it with the Argentinian film producers who produced a film called Los Muchachos. So Los Muchachos was the film that showed Argentina winning the previous World Cup. It wasn't the official FIFA film, but we negotiated a deal with FIFA. Disney have taken it. We'll have a teaser of it very shortly, in a couple of weeks' time. Then we'll have the main film probably by early September, and we'll go out with it in October. It'll go in cinematic release in October. Of course, it's become quite a hot item because of events.
I was going to use that word, heat. Yeah, there's some heat there.
Yeah. Clearly, the plan that FIFA, that President Infantino put together was not presented correctly. Clearly, it wasn't presented at the right time in the right way. And it could have been done better. But the actual concept, I find it extraordinary, the reaction from UEFA and from others, given, for example, that Liverpool is now the subject of an investment, or Fenway have sold or are in the process of selling. I think Fenway bought the Liverpool for 400 million. Mm-hmm. It's now being valued at 6 billion, right? This thought that private equity or hot money or money was not, selling football, was that the phrase that was used?
Yeah, it was not
a little bit of a nonsense, because first of all, FIFA wasn't going to be sold. A separate company, exactly the same way as F1. I was on the board of F1 for 9 years, so I know how the F1, if you remember, Bernie Ecclestone negotiated famously with Max Mosley, who was the head of FI. So you had FIA, which was the equivalent of FIFA, and you had F1, which is the equivalent of FFE, and Bernie Ecclestone representing F1, negotiating with Max Mosley, sitting in Monaco with the FIA, negotiates a 99-year lease. Now, in this particular case, there were going to be 12-year leases. So FIFA would have the right to withdraw the license after 3 cycles, if there was mismanagement or for whatever reason. But all they were doing, or proposing to do, was set up the separate company for FIFA Forward, FFE, and grant it a 12-year lease, if you like, to commercially exploit the tournaments and develop the tournaments, and the commercial rights would pass as a result, and sell a proportion of the stock effectively for each association. Each association would get, I think, 20 million a year in terms of fees from the license fee. And then they would get another 20 million on the capital sale. So it was a selling of a minority interest in a private company with a right that only extended technically for 12 years. So not exactly a bargain.
No.
A bargain. Now, there were unfortunate things. Firstly, the way it was presented, I think the private equity investor that was chosen to lead, probably a little bit controversial for various reasons, to put it mildly. That made it more difficult. But the actual concept of private money, private equity coming in and giving fans the opportunity ultimately to invest, that's not a foreign concept.
No.
For UEFA to take the position that they're taking when their own leagues, when La Liga, the Bundesliga, the Premier League. I mean, the Premier League is dominated. Who dominates the Premier League in terms of investment? Is it owned by British people?
Not anymore.
No? Maybe we should ask the Prime Minister that. Who is it owned by? It's owned mainly by Americans and by Middle Eastern interests.
Increasingly so.
And the basic problem is this. 70% of the revenues from football accrue to 5 nations, to UK or England, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And what's going on is, in Infantino's case, he's trying to democratize football. There are probably, 2.6, 2.7 billion people who don't play football, the Chinese and the Indians. Tremendous number of fans, obviously a big opportunity to develop that fan base and interest, and ultimately for those countries to be playing. But also all the other countries that he brought in through a 48-country World Cup, and maybe even a 64, much more controversial. We saw a much more competitive World Cup. Capo Verde and others participating. African size getting through to the final stage, not to the final stages, but to the final stages. So I think what it is very interesting to me. It's almost like it mirrors the conflict between the G7 and the BRICS and the Next 11. What you're seeing is the power in the world being distributed in a different way. I mean, and that's a little maybe portentous and pretentious, but I don't think it is. I think what we're witnessing is the changes that are taking place globally. You know, that the power of Western Europe is being diminished. You see economically. And as I say, 70% of the revenue that accrues from football accrues to those 5 nations. And over time, that's going to change.
Talking of change, I know that you've been a change maker, which goes all in.
Tried to, yeah.
There you have. So there's companies specializing in AI, like IFS, ChatGPT, OpenAI, Google Gemini. How is AI affecting all your business interests now?
Hugely. I mean, it's well. Back up for a minute. Firstly, consumers like you and I use it far more aggressively than companies. So consumer adoption is faster than company adoption, which is a little bit strange, but we've seen that before with the internet. We've seen that before with the mobile phone and the smartphone. That consumers probably adapt faster. And there's a number of reasons for that, but just to make me go through the reasons how it's affecting our business. And it's probably 5 ways. Firstly, what we call visualization copywriting. So that's the time taken to make an ad and the cost of it. So you can do it through synthetically. You don't have to go to the top of a mountain for a snow scene anymore. You can do it synthetically. We can argue whether it's the right thing or not. I was just listening to something on Radio 4 this morning about a rock band on Spotify that was totally AI generated. The critics said it was pretty average in terms of, but the technology is improving all the time. So average will become better over time. But he was arguing that it was synthetic and therefore not good. So visualization copywriting is number 1. Personalization at scale is number 2. We can reach you. We know you're interested in property. We know you're interested in doing 230 interviews like this with the people you've interviewed. We can message you knowing what your interests are. We have 2 sources. One is the first party data that we have on you because of our commercial relationship, and the second is signals from platforms, from Alphabet, from Meta, from Amazon or TikTok and whatever. So personalization at scale becoming hugely important. Tailoring ads. So instead of having appointment by television where you sit in front of a screen and it's a mass audience, you're relating to people on an individual basis. That is huge. The third area is media planning and buying. We're a relatively small industry. We're only about 1.2 trillion last year of ad revenues, probably 1.3, 1.4 this year. Just to put it in perspective, BlackRock manages 14 trillion of assets, right? And there's just one provider in the equity industry or the investment industry. Sure. We're in media investment management. We're exactly the same as the investment industry, but what we try and manage for clients for media planning and buying is where they buy their media. So we call it media investment management. That will become totally algorithmic. At the moment, 75% of that 1.2 and 1.3 trillion is provided digitally. Google last year was 300 billion of ad revenues. This year will probably be about 350. Meta was 200. This year will probably be 250. Amazon was about 75. This year will be about 80, 85. And TikTok last year, outside China, was about 40. It will probably be about, let's say, 50. You put all those 4 together, those 4 platforms account for well over half of the total of 1.2 and 2/3 of the 900 billion. So it's a huge concentration in these platforms, and you can algorithmically analyze where it is best. And the outputs you get are much more sophisticated than the human mind can develop, but the human mind can then play with those in a much more creative and effective way. So that's the third area. The fourth area is general efficiency. So we've got an outside broadcast relationship with Nvidia, AWS, and Adobe, where we reduce the cost of outside broadcasting by using the cloud and remote broadcasting instead of on site by about 80 or 90%. So huge. That's just an example of the efficiencies. And the fifth area, which I think is super interesting, is democratizing companies, meaning you're going to have different structures as a result. My favorite example is Jensen Wang, who has 51 direct reports, or 50 direct reports. Doesn't do one-to-one meetings. I had lunch with one of his direct reports recently, and he said to me, he's never had a one-to-one meeting with Jensen Wang. The only one-to-one meetings he had was when he was being recruited in 2012. So, and this flattening of the organization and providing information to everybody in the organization, because in Nvidia people have access, means that you flatten it and you make it much more efficient, much more agile, much more responsive. I think that is absolutely huge. And we'll see whether other companies in time, the impact on government and government efficiency could be huge too. So those are the five areas. Having said that, where do we see adoption? We only see adoption in companies or in verticals where there's an existential threat. So for example, in the auto industry, where you have companies like BYD who can produce an autonomous vehicle for $10,000 with God's Eye, which is their technology, or an EV for $25,000, super competitive. The founder and Stella Lee, who's the chief executive of BYD in Europe and the Americas, has said she wants BYD to be the biggest car manufacturer in the world. It's number 5 at the minute, which means it probably has to double in size from where it is now. So hugely ambitious, Chinese driven. There was an article this morning, actually on Bloomberg, I think it was, where it talked about how the Chinese are dominating the car parts supply chain in Europe. That's one of the ways they're investing very heavily, and where they have very significant, it's the front page of the FT, I think. They have significant influence and maybe even control, certainly influence, of the supply chain. So where you get an existential threat, you get people moving at scale on AI.
Sure.
Second example would be financial services. Branch banking is under huge pressure from Revolut and Nubank. We work for them in Mexico and Brazil. They're launching in America now. They have a banking license. They're launching on the back of F1, actually, interestingly, and also the Nubank Stadium, which is the Messi Beckham Stadium into Miami and in Miami. So they're putting huge pressure. So the branch banking companies like HSBC, Santander, JP Morgan Chase, everybody have to react to it. The third area where we're seeing, a third vertical, a little bit, not pervasive yet, but we are seeing it, is packaged goods. So a Unilever, a Procter is starting to see that consumers are price resistant. They increase their prices, Pepsi, Coke, Mondelez increased their prices during COVID and after it by 10 or 15% a year because of commodity price increases, but also because they could. And they're now seeing a bit of consumer resistance. And then all the global political issues around US-China relations, around Russia, and around Iran mean the supply chain is becoming more difficult and more complex. So their supply chain costs are increasing and the margins are coming under pressure. So net, big impact on our business, big impact on manufacturing and other areas of corporate activity, organizational structure, etc. Take up depends on how much pressure you have. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the other thing, I have never seen, I've been at this for a fair bit of time, as you said, I can't remember ever, even in the 80s, where corporates have been doing so well. Look at the S&P 500 in Q2 of this year. EPS probably up about 22%, including the hyperscalers. Take out the hyperscalers, still high double digits. We've had 7 quarters of double-digit EPS growth. So what's not to like, right?
No,
and if you're doing well, particularly in, I don't mean this in a bad way, bureaucratic organizations where CEOs last for on average 5 or 6 years or whatever it is. CMOs only last for about 18 months, 2 years, where you see this violent change. Why do you need to change?
No,
a wholesale. So just finally, what's really interesting is we're starting to see pressure in some companies build through the financial function. And the people, our biggest clients are the hyperscalers. They are Google and Meta and Apple and Nvidia. These are all the people that we work with, and T-Mobile and Amazon. These are the people we work with. And they're all starting to understand that the really engine of change inside a company is when the CEO comes under pressure on quarterly reporting, or if it's a private equity company, from the investment committee to hit the EBITDA target. And it's the financial function that then puts pressure on the organization to change. So what we're starting to see, which I think is really interesting, is CFOs become much more a part of the team, together with the CMO and the CIO and the Chief Digital Officer, to get change.
Come on, humanize. I love the fact that you said your father was a people person, and that's rippled through.
Well, he was a retailer, so he understood about people.
So much now is going to potentially be relying on AI, which potentially could take away that empathy, that gut instinct, which you 100% will have used subconsciously, built that kind of memory bank of what's worked for you, the mistakes you learn. And how much of that potentially, where you're sort of relying on the AI machine as it is gathering all the momentum, how important is the human element going to be?
Well, I think. Look. The honest answer is I don't know, but I can give you a view. I think in the short to medium term, the human element becomes even more important. So, I remember James Quincy at Coca-Cola saying on a call about a year or so ago, if everybody can do personalization at scale, how do I differentiate Coca-Cola advertising? Well, the answer is this, right? The humor, the agency, the big idea, whatever, the strategic insight, the creative brilliance won't be the defining factor. The issue in my mind is beyond that. Let's say that's 3, 4, 5 years. If you see some of the TikTok films that Eric Schmidt has done, or Demis at Davos, at Cannes, the Cannes Advertising Festival a few weeks ago. I wasn't in the room, but I'm told he did say that machines will become more powerful than people. If that is the case, then you'd probably veer more towards the Elon school. Elon Musk did an interview, I think, with The Economist a couple of weeks ago, when he said, we'll not be working at all because robots will be doing it for us.
Yeah, I read that.
I was listening to an interview yesterday on CNBC, actually, where a German robot manufacturer said, no, the robots will do all the work that human beings don't like to do, the dirty work, if you like. Sure. We'll see. My view would tend to be, I'm not in the Elon camp. I mean, or Sam Altman said 95% of advertising jobs will disappear. I wouldn't go as far as what Elon Musk has said or what Sam Altman said, but directionally, I'd be in that direction. I think it is more likely that machines will become so powerful that they will be. I tried to study economics for many years. And I think it was in 1930, John Maynard Keynes, famous Cambridge economist, or global economist, wrote a pamphlet on automation, where he said, we'll have more holidays as a result. So I think he was right, but I think it was 100 years too early. So I do think this whole area of employment is going to become super difficult. I think in our business, I'm working with Harvard Business School. There's a professor there, Karim Lakhani, who's doing a lot of forward thinking with a number of people on the impact of AI on professional services businesses. There's a woman who's doing some research into it, and did an interview with her recently. And I asked her what her hypothesis was, and she's looking not just at agencies, she's looking at consulting companies, accounting companies, lawyers, investment banks. And you're going to get two levels. You're going to have, in our case, strategists and creatives, probably fewer of them, probably more highly paid. And then you'll have more people doing the implementational what we call the foundational work.
Sure.
So you sort of get two levels in the organization. We'll see how it pans out. But these machines, and the other thing that people don't talk about, and I go to a thing called Google Zeitgeist every year in North America, in Montecito, in Meganland. And we were allowed into the Santa Barbara Quantum Lab last year. And it is quite remarkable what they're doing. And, if you, as I said before, if you think AI has had an impact, stand by, because, the compute power that quantum brings it's on steroids.
Interesting times, right?
Yeah. So I think net, it's going to take a lot. I mean, having said all that, just one thing I will say, running a company in these times is much more difficult than it was.
I thought you'd say that.
Much more difficult.
A number of people will be able to describe you as successful. So many things you've done. I'd love to know your definition of success.
Proving the model. And I wouldn't say being successful really in that sense. I mean, Sarge is, we took to a certain level. We took WPP to a certain level. Neither have survived, right? I mean, WPP is, must be about 60-70% less in terms of value than 2018. A lot of question about Sarge's has sort of disappeared into various things. We'll see what happens with S4 over time. We had our good time and we had a tougher time, although things are getting a little bit better now. But I think the answer to your question is proving the concept. Whatever it is we were trying to do, demonstrating that the model works. And so I think that's how I would define success.
No, I appreciate that.
Oh.
Number of things you've achieved. Sitting here as a Knight of the Realm and all the different business accolades.
My
and
mother
so
liked it.
What's the greatest achievement?
Well, you come back to kids, I guess. That's what you come back to at the end of the day. So I mean, I did a course at Harvard Business School called Planning in the Business Environment, and it was with a guy called Henry Cabot Lodge, and Henry was the son of George Cabot Lodge, and George Cabot Lodge was, I think, the Secretary of State in the Eisenhower administration. We didn't think much of George in my class at HBS. But I've got to tell you, he had his thinking was profound, and he did this course called Planning in the Business Environment, which was a compulsory course in the first year on strategy. And he had a Venn diagram, and we thought it was BS. And if you reproduce the Venn diagram, by the way, you got an A on the course. I reproduced it. I remember my exam when I got an A-. But it was three circles. One circle was family, one was society, and one was career. And what he did was, he said, life is about how you manage those three areas and how you bring them together, how they intersect. I think I would define success as being successful in all those three areas, right? Which I wasn't, right, or haven't been. But I think that's the objective. And I actually think that is a super good way of describing it. So it's about family. I put that first. I would say career, and then society. And then it's how the intersection of those three circles. And if you can get them as one, we're going to see a solar eclipse later. But if you can think about those three circles coming together, they're one. They're one. I think that's it. So I would define success as if you can demonstrate success, I define it as happiness actually, in those three areas, then we've done it.
One of the key ways you've achieved a lot of success is by leadership, leading with your gut, leading with the information you've got to hand, and then importantly making a decision. What would you say are the most important values of leadership?
Yeah, you are what you are. I mean, being authentic. I think there are lots of things. I think speed of decision making. If I hesitate, it's because I don't know what the answer is, right? Or if people generally hesitate, it's because they don't know what the answer is. I think a lot of it is instinctive. I mean, authenticity is important. Speed of decision making is really important. Delay is a negative. I mean, I had a terrible phrase which was, a bad decision on Monday was better than a good decision on Friday. That was which is a bad way of putting it. It's always been trying to apply the principles of running a small company. I mean, going back to what you said about deal making, it wasn't about deal making. It was about being able to act faster and in a more agile way than the opponent. That was always...
That makes sense.
That was always the opportunity. I mean, I haven't written a book, but if I was to write a book, I would write about what I've seen, how companies, clients and agencies managed to subvert the purpose of the leadership. I mean, you would be amazed, as I've been continually amazed, by the ingenuity that people show in preventing things from happening. Okay, we talked about AI, and I mean, there's a lot of things that go on where it is clear that applying AI would help, where people delay, defer, demur, or whatever it happens to be. So I think the critical thing is, and that's where I think AI is really the most exciting, is the change that it will bring to organization. I think Nvidia, I've been trying to get Harvard Business School to write a case study on Nvidia, unsuccessfully, because I think what Jensen Wang is doing, and it may be that it's Jensen, right? It may be it's his style and it's unique. I don't think it is. I think I'll just give you an example. Early 2000s, when the internet was coming really into play, I went to Mexico Tech College. I always remember that. When Ogilvy were doing the branding, and we met the principal. I think there were about 30,000 students then. It's now much, much bigger. And he said to me and to Miles Young, who was running Ogilvy then, he said, you've got to understand how important the internet is to Mexican villages. There are all these villages, kids in villages around Mexico who didn't have a library. And you have the internet available. Now, the marginal cost of information is zero, and they can access all this information. Well, if you think about the same thing in relation to AI and how it democratizes knowledge inside a company. So instead of people building a silo and controlling it by controlling information, they can't do that anymore. Because if the information is available to everybody, and then there's Sorrell's law of cooperation, is that the deeper you go inside an organization, the more cooperative people are.
That's really good to see.
I mean, the further up you go, the more resistant people are, because it threatens their,
yes.
Not threatens, or it sort of challenges their control, right? And what you want to do is to get to a situation where it's very flat, where the reporting ratio. Mark Zuckerberg recently, in a memo to Meta people, made this point: more agile teams, he said, and also talked about 50-to-1 ratios, which is the Jensen, direct report. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's the mythology. And I think that's super important. Now, if you think about government, and you think about industry, and you think about business, so I don't have any sort of fundamental principle. You are what you are. You're authentic, and you do what you believe is the right thing. Now, you've got to have a good strategy. You've got to have a good structure.
Yes.
And then you've got to get it implemented, which is not easy. I mean, bringing businesses together, integrating them is very difficult.
So interesting to listen to. I've got one last question.
Sure.
I'll talk to you for a lot longer. The kind of myth, if you like, of to be successful, you've got to get up at 4 a.m. You've got to run the marathon. You've got to read the book. Where have you sat with that through your life and right now? Are you an early riser and try and attack the day?
Yeah, but there are people who are very successful who don't get up early in the morning and
what about
work late. Well, my day, like this morning, I woke up at 6. I was a little bit lethargic this morning, got out of bed about 6:30. I didn't have I sort of woke up at about 3 a.m. this morning, thinking about some things. you try and go to bed early. This is an interesting device because it sort of disciplines your life and makes you much more conscious about, sleep is very important. I don't get enough of it. So I would say I'm 24/7.
Feels like it. You thrive on that, right?
We have this, we have this debate as to in the office or out of the office, right? Especially, COVID didn't create this. COVID accelerated it. That's why I say it's quite difficult now, because Gen Z has a different attitude, I think, in many respects, and it is quite difficult. But I believe in 7 days a week in the office, not 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So, the one, I tell you what, this may tell you a lot about me. One thing that drives me crazy is out of office, particularly in our business. Because if I'm a client and I have a crisis and I send a note to thing, and there was one email out of office that absolutely drove me insane when I was at WPP, drove me absolutely insane. A guy said, it was out of office, I'm out of office on holiday, I'm at the end of an olive grove, there's no reception, and it drove me absolutely crazy, because if I was a client with a problem, I wouldn't care, right?
It's not helping you.
It's not what I pay for. So, if you're away, I'm not saying people shouldn't take holidays, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that there should be a really efficient mechanism. It's not enough to say I'm out of home.
Yeah.
It's you should direct them there. So I think thinking about it that way is really important.
Yeah. Well, I said to you I was going to enjoy this conversation, and I have. You're so interesting to talk about. So, Martin, thank you.
And we didn't get to talk about Andy Burnham.
I know we didn't. Maybe next time.
Okay, thanks
so much.